Alright mate, Slimeade here, and yeah, I did say that last time I'd be doing a video on Sabrina, and she is in the thumbnail, but this isn't that video. This is actually an entirely separate idea. Now, for a good long while now, I have planned on doing a video on JRPGs, and how they connect back to Pokemon. But there was one idea in that video that the more and more research I did about it, the bigger and bigger it kind of got, and this is that video. So now that we've got that out of the way, let's ask one question. Are psychic types white mages? Now this doesn't just come out of thin air. This is actual basis on something really weird and specific in the Generation 1 Pokemon games. The Channeler Trainer class, which for the purposes of how Generation 1 worked, were the female psychics, as they do appear in Sabrina's gym. One of them, in the top of Pokemon Tower, says she has sealed an area with white magic, which is a weirdly specific thing to say in a game where there doesn't seem to be magic outside of the creatures, and for the most part all we've ever seen are psychics. Now, there is kind of a little bit of a thing that I want to go on about white mages themselves. So, white mages have a subclass called the Devout, and in some Final Fantasy games they're also called the Seer. And Seers are, through basic definition, psychics. They see into the future. And the Devouts are also known as priests in Japanese. Now, if you actually look at the white mages and the Devouts in terms of design, you'll notice something that they both have in common. They both wear white and red, which is, interestingly enough, the same colour that Shinto priestesses wear. And the reason why I brought this up is because the Channeler Trainer class is actually based on Shinto priestesses. They even carry the Gohei with them, which is a kind of wand that the Shinto priestesses use. Now that we've got that out of the way about the Channeler Trainer class, let's actually talk about Psychic type Pokemon themselves. Now, Psychic type Pokemon do have a strangely large overlap with white mages, such as having a very high equivalent of a magic stat and having very high equivalent of a magic defense stat with special attack and special defense. Now, it is worth mentioning that white mages do have a counterpart of black mage, and Final Fantasy's magic stat is split in two. There's spirit and intelligence. But getting onto something about Final Fantasy's white mages for a quick second, there was actually a kind of damage type in Final Fantasy II called the Psychic type. Now, speaking of magic, apparently it kind of does exist in Pokemon, because Kadabra, Meditite and Medicham are said to have spiritual powers. Espeon's abilities are said to be arcane. Xatu is said to be the mystic Pokemon. Galarian Slowking can create potions and is known as the Hexpert Pokemon. And also, Hoopa is known as the Margin Pokemon, which a lot of people will probably be most famous for the term Margin from Majin Buu from Dragon Ball. But Margin can translate from demon person to magic person or just magician. And now that we're getting into the whole subject of white magic, I'm just going to address something quite interesting about the Psychic type first. Almost half of the Psychic type's moves are status moves. There's 9 physical moves, 32 special moves, and 40 status moves. Now, first of all, the most iconic white mage spell is Cure, which heals damage. Now, for the longest time, Pokemon really didn't have a good equivalent to this. They did have Healing Wish, Rest, but it wasn't until Generation 5 when we got Heal Pulse, which is basically exactly what Cure is. There's also Lunar Blessing, and both Rest, Heal Pulse, Healing Wish, and Lunar Blessing are all Psychic type moves. And it would be worth throwing up out there that Recover is mostly learnt by Psychic types too. White mages also get the spells Protect and Shell. Now, I'm just going to put it out there straight away. Protect in Final Fantasy doesn't work like Protect in Pokemon. However, Protect and Shell in terms of moves boosts the team's defense and magic defense. Where have we heard that before? of course, Reflect and Light Screen, which are also Psychic type moves. Then there's the spell Blink, which uses illusions to create doppelganger copies of your mage or whoever they're supporting, which the closest equivalent to that really is Double Team. However, a lot of Psychic types, such as for example Abra, can create illusions to help themselves dodge, which is stated in its Pokédex. Now this one's a little more iffy than some of the rest, but White Mages can also raise opponents from being knocked out or dead or whatever terminology they're going for in that game. And there isn't really a Psychic type move that does that. However, there is a move called Revival Blessing that's been added in Scarlet and Violet, and one of the two Pokemon that can learn it, which is Rabsca, is a Psychic type. And then there's also the spell Teleport, which allows you to escape dungeons, and yeah, I don't think I really need to elaborate on that one too much. There's also the spell Mini, which allows you to either shrink yourself or shrink your opponent or shrink an ally. And, well, there's the move Minimize, that really isn't the same thing. There's also one non-canon incident that, yeah, it's that episode, and I will eventually get around to talking about that. Then there's also the spell Haste, which allows your White Mage to boost themselves or their allies' speed. So it's basically just agility, but with wider range. Then there's the spell Confuse, which confuses opponents and causes them to hit themselves, which we all know as Pokemon fans that Pokemon has the same thing. Now there is no status-based Psychic type move that does confusion. However, there's the moves Confusion and Psybeam, which can inflict it on a successful hit. Then there's the spell Float, which allows you to either float an ally or your enemy in the air and make them immune for being hit from ground attacks, which is literally just telekinesis. There's Slow, which changes the turn order in which you're battling, which is, again, it's basically Trick Room. And then there's the interesting case of one Black Mage spell, which overlaps with a Psychic type move. There's a spell called Sleep, which does what you'd expect. It puts your opponent to sleep, and it's basically just hypnosis. And on the note of Black Mages, their main stat is Intelligence. And the one thing Psychic types are generally quite known for is having high intelligence. So White Mages also aren't inherently helpless. They actually do get access to a few offensive spells, namely the Aero spells, and famously Holy. Now, Pokemon does have a kind of an equivalent to Holy with Moonblast, but that's Fairy type and not Psychic type. But you could make a slight argument that if Fairy type never existed, Moonblast would have been a Psychic type move. And it's almost as if Fairy has kind of took some of the aspects that were for the Psychic type and kind of transferred it over to the Fairy type. And just one closing thought before I end this whole thing off. I'm just going to put up a picture of Mega Gardevoir and Rosa's dress in Final Fantasy IV because there is some similarities going on there. And if you like this video, don't forget to like, rate, comment and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!